Hi, I'm Jessica Amir for the Finance News Network with the New South Wales Treasurer, Honourable Dominic Perrottet. Thanks so much for having us in your office.
My pleasure, Jessica.
So first up, you just announced a massive $3.3 billion surplus, beating expectations and the 4-year average. Can you just unravel the details and what really led to that?
Yeah, for sure. So we announced this $2.7 billion projected surplus in the budget this year, and that's increased up to $3.3 billion. And a lot of that has been the fiscal discipline behind the scenes from the government, but also higher than expected payroll tax coming through as we've seen a greater improvement in full-time workforce here in New South Wales. We've seen a slight moderation in transfer duty, but I guess what's been at the heart of the success for us here in New South Wales is making better use of what we have. And from an asset recycling perspective, that's really been what I call the secret sauce of our success here. And that's resulted in a strong position where we're getting rid of old assets, putting them into new assets, which has obviously assisted in the strength of the New South Wales budget position.
And speaking about the budget position, what's the state doing to ensure surpluses continue in the future?
One of the key factors here in New South Wales has been the fact that we enshrined in law the Fiscal Responsibility Act. And as part of that, we've got to keep our expenses below long-term revenue growth, and that's at 5.6%. And you'll see other states around the country have a similar act, but no real definition behind it. So that makes sure that regardless, however the revenues are running, our expenses remain under control. And you look at places like Western Australia when the mining boom was running red hot, and their expenses the revenues were high, so were their expenses. So we keep that fiscal discipline behind the scenes because we know that if there is any softening down the track, we want to make sure that New South Wales is well positioned for any of those changes.
And Dominic, you mentioned in your half-yearly update tax revenues on a downward trend, with really the first home buyers taking advantage of your offsets. So what's the outlook now going forward?
Well, in the most recent budget, we brought in tax cuts for first home buyers for new homes up to $650,000 and concessions up to $800,000. And we've seen a real impact there and an above trend take up. So in the same time last year, we had about 3,000 new homeowners accessing our concessions. That's up to 13,000 in the same period. And pre-July 1 this year, we had about 5% of purchases being made by first homeowners. That has tripled now to 15%. So we're seeing first home buyers coming back into the market. That's obviously a very positive thing. And as a treasurer, I'm happy to lose a little bit of revenue if that means that we're getting first homeowners back into the market. But above all, in terms of the housing market, we're seeing from our projections in the last budget that it would increase at a decreasing rate from about 5.9% down to 5.4%. At this half-yearly update, we're seeing things generally in line with that. What we've seen over the last 12 months is over 70,000 new approvals on the residential construction side. That is a record here in New South Wales, and that will now translate into completions and constructions. There's no doubt here in New South Wales that whilst our economy is going well, construction is king. It is at the forefront of everything that's happening across New South Wales, and we see that residential construction continuing now and into the future.
Now to your record spending on infrastructure, over $80 billion. Just give us a breakdown, Dominic, on where that's going per city and region.
Well, over $80 billion, our infrastructure spend is more than the Canadian government's infrastructure spend. So never before have we seen infrastructure being built like we are today. And the IMF recently came out and said, if there's one thing that governments can do to boost their economic growth, it's get involved in the production of public infrastructure. So here in New South Wales, I don't think you'll find another state that is achieving the infrastructure growth that we are here. There are more cranes over the skies than almost anywhere else in the world, just outside Dubai. And from a city regional perspective, we have a fund called Restart New South Wales, which has over $30 billion in that fund, and 30% of that fund is invested in regional New South Wales. But importantly, it's in the infrastructure that drives economic growth, but provides the support that our citizens need in regional New South Wales. And one of the great aspects of the budget was going out to regional communities, and whether it was delivering a new hospital in Tweed for $500 million when they were just simply requested $50 million for an upgrade. We are really seeing the benefits of the infrastructure investment we're making. So whether that's in health and education, $7.7 billion in health funding, $4.2 billion on the education side. At the same time, everywhere you look in metropolitan Sydney, as well, you will just see construction activity, and that brings in convenience. But we know that really New South Wales is changing for the first time in a long time, and when this construction is finished, we're going to have the best city in the world.
So you've mentioned quite a lot of other highlights from your half-year review, but is there anything else that you wanted to hone in on?
We're the only state with a 4 in front of our unemployment rate at 4.6%. The next closest state is Victoria at 5.7%. Our jobs growth, we committed to providing about 150,000 jobs in the 2015 election. We've already exceeded that. We're well over 200,000 jobs. Importantly though, those jobs are being created are full-time jobs, about 80% of our jobs in full-time employment. And that compares to around 42% in full-time employment around the rest of the country. But also hitting $80 billion in infrastructure, when you see as well that the economic growth in this country, almost half of that growth is coming straight out of New South Wales, shows you really that we are the engine room of the national economy.
So just yesterday, the Federal Treasurer announced that economic growth has been downgraded somewhat, but New South Wales is really outpacing the nation, contributing the bulk of growth to the national economy. What can we expect of the next 2 years and beyond, Dominic?
Well, the economic growth here in New South Wales has certainly been the major contributor to economic growth across the country. We're almost twice that rate, so at 2.9% compared to about 1.4% from a Commonwealth perspective. We would see our economic growth continue up to about 3% and then falling back to about 2.5% by 2021, which is about trend. And what we're doing in New South Wales, though, we always have a very strong diversified economy, but with our public investment in infrastructure, that adds about 0.5 percentage point to our economic growth across the board. So we believe that we're in a very strong position here in New South Wales. We continue to probably lead the way, and we'll see that. We will see some of the other states, obviously, as the mining boom has fallen away, they will continue now to increase their economic output, and that's obviously a great thing for the country. But here in New South Wales right now, with a significant construction, a diversified economy, particularly if you look at the service industry and tourism, education, health services, we will continue to power ahead, and that's a great thing for the people of New South Wales.
Well, Dominic Perrottet, an absolute privilege and an honour. Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks, Jessica.